The first sign wasn't my wife acting distant, it was my lawyer acting familiar. It happened during a call that should have been forgettable. Paperwork, timelines, the dull, responsible choreography of adults trying to make sure their future didn't unravel because of some technicality no one warned them about. I was half listening, nodding along, trusting the process the way you do when you've hired someone specifically so you don't have to worry about details. My lawyer, Caldwell, was explaining a clause I barely understood, his voice calm, precise, reassuring. Then, without missing a beat, he turned his attention to my wife. "Does that make sense to you?" he asked her, tone softening in a way that didn't feel rehearsed. It felt practiced. She nodded immediately, not thoughtfully, not cautiously, just nodded like she already knew where he was going. "That's what I thought," he said, smiling. I remember frowning slightly, the way you do when something feels off but you don't yet have the language for it. Lawyers build rapport. That's their job. Couples don't always react at the same pace. I told myself it was nothing. But the call ended, and the feeling stayed. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing small things, the kind of details you only register once your brain has been nudged into paying attention. Caldwell began addressing emails to both of us, but the replies always came back addressed to her. He'd mentioned follow-ups she and I hadn't discussed. He referenced conversations I wasn't present for. When I asked Lena about it, she waved it off easily. "I just had a couple of questions," she said. "Didn't want to bother you." That sounded reasonable, loving even. I wanted to believe that my wife was protecting me from unnecessary stress. So, I did what I'd been doing more and more lately. I accepted the explanation and moved on. The night everything truly shifted wasn't dramatic. No argument, no raised voices, just a quiet evening, and a laptop left open a few seconds too long. I was printing documents in the dining room, drafts Caldwell wanted reviewed before our next meeting. The printer hummed, page after page, sliding out with my name neatly typed at the top. I stepped into the kitchen to grab a drink, and when I came back, the screen had gone dark. I nudged the trackpad to wake it. The inbox appeared. At the top was a thread I didn't remember opening. Caldwell's name, already read. The timestamp was recent, less than an hour ago. My first thought was that I'd simply forgotten. Stress does that. Fatigue blurs days together. I clicked the thread casually, expecting a scheduling note or a reminder about signatures. What I saw made my stomach drop. Not because it was explicit, but because it wasn't. "Lena, thank you for staying late. I feel calmer when it's just us." Caldwell, "You don't need to panic. I'll handle it the right way." Lena, "He can't know yet." Caldwell, "We'll be careful. This could complicate things." Careful. That word sat there like a verdict. Because careful isn't professional language. It's the word people use when they know they're doing something that requires concealment. I scrolled upward, my fingers cold on the trackpad. There weren't many messages, just enough to show a pattern, a familiarity that had nothing to do with legal counsel. Caldwell, "Did you get home okay?" Lena, "Yes, thank you for walking me out." Caldwell, "You were shaken." Lena, "I don't feel like myself lately." Caldwell, "You don't have to go through it alone." I felt hollow, like something essential had been quietly removed while I was busy trusting the wrong structures to hold my life together. This wasn't just an affair, if that's even the right word for it. This was collaboration, strategy. Two people aligning themselves behind my back. One of them paid to represent me. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. I snapped the laptop shut like it might accuse me of something if I left it open. Lena walked into the room in socks, hair damp from a shower, wearing one of my old shirts. She smiled easily, the way she always did when she thought everything was fine. "Did the printer finally behave?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. My voice sounded normal to my own ears, which surprised me. She poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and turned it face down in one smooth motion, so practiced it might have been unconscious. That was when the confusion hardened into certainty, because I'd seen that reflex before, a dozen times, maybe more. Little moments I'd dismissed as privacy, independence, normal boundaries between adults. Now they all lined up behind the word careful. "You okay?" she asked, studying my face. "Just tired," I said. She nodded, satisfied with that answer. "Caldwell said he can come by tomorrow evening so we can finalize everything. He thinks it'll be easier that way." My chest tightened. "Here?" "Yes," she said quickly. "He's busy. This saves time." The idea of my lawyer sitting in my living room after work, with my wife, suddenly felt unbearable. Not because of what I knew, but because of what I didn't yet know. How far this had gone. How long I'd been the only one in the dark. I looked at the stack of printed documents on the table. My signature line waited patiently at the bottom of the page. I realized then that this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about consent, about whether I was being maneuvered into agreements, legal, emotional, personal, without understanding the full picture. Lena reached out and rested her hand on my shoulder. The gesture used to comfort me. Now it felt like pressure. "We're doing the right thing," she said softly. I nodded because I needed time, because I understood something important in that moment. If I confronted her now, I'd get the version they'd prepared. The calm explanation. The plausible denial reinforced by a man trained to make stories sound airtight. So, I stayed quiet. I watched. And I decided that before I signed anything, before I agreed to any future shaped by people choosing their words too carefully, I would learn exactly what game I'd been placed in. Because the first sign hadn't been my wife pulling away. It had been my lawyer stepping closer. And whatever was happening between them had already moved far beyond coincidence. Caldwell arrived the next evening exactly on time. Not early, not late, as if punctuality itself were part of the performance. I watched from the hallway as Lena opened the door. She didn't hesitate. She didn't glance back to check where I was. She smiled the way you smile at someone you're comfortable with, someone whose presence doesn't need explaining. Caldwell stepped inside, carrying a slim leather folder under his arm, already loosening his tie like he belonged there. "Good evening," he said when he saw me, voice warm, practiced. "Thank you for having me." My living room felt suddenly smaller, like the walls had adjusted to fit the three of us more efficiently. We sat at the dining table. Papers were laid out neatly, aligned with a precision that suggested control. Caldwell moved through them with ease, explaining clauses and contingencies, his pen tapping lightly whenever he wanted to emphasize a point. When he spoke to me, his tone was formal, professional. When he spoke to Lena, it softened again. Just slightly, but enough that I could hear the difference now. "And this section," he said, turning the page toward her, "is what we discussed." Discussed. She nodded. "Right, that's what I wanted clarified." I kept my face still, my hands folded in front of me, while something cold slid into place inside my chest. They'd discussed things, separately, intentionally, without me. I asked a question then, not aggressive, just curious. "When did you two go over that?" Caldwell didn't miss a beat. Lena had some follow-up concerns after our last meeting. Entirely reasonable. She wanted to make sure she understood how things would affect you. A perfect answer, framed as care, as diligence. Lena met my eyes. "I didn't want to overwhelm you," she said. "You've had a lot on your plate." There it was again. Protection masquerading as exclusion. The meeting ended smoothly. Signatures were scheduled for the following week. Caldwell gathered his papers, thanked us again, and headed for the door. Lena walked him out. I stayed seated. I heard the door open. Close. Then voices, lower now, blurred by distance. I couldn't make out words, but I could hear tone. Intimacy has a sound. It lives in pauses and softness, in the way voices lean toward each other. When Lena came back in, her cheeks were flushed. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yes," she said too quickly. "He just wanted to remind me to send those bank statements." I nodded like I believed her. That night, I slept poorly. Not because I was angry, but because I was alert. My mind replayed small moments from the past few months with new clarity. The afternoon she came home later than usual after meetings. The way she'd grown more confident talking about legal details she'd once found boring. The way Caldwell's name surfaced casually in conversation, like a shared reference point. The next morning, I checked the calendar. There were entries I didn't recognize, meetings Lena had never mentioned, blocks of time she'd labeled vaguely, errands, appointments, catch up. I didn't confront her. I did something else. I watched. Over the following week, I noticed how often Caldwell's name appeared in her messages. Never blatant, never frequent enough to feel obvious. Always professional on the surface. But timing matters. So does context. I noticed how she dressed differently on days she said she'd be seeing him. More effort, more intention. I noticed how she'd rehearse conversations in the mirror sometimes, stopping when she heard me approach. One afternoon, I came home early without telling her. The house was quiet. Her car wasn't in the driveway. I checked my phone. No message, no update, then I saw it. Caldwell's car parked a few houses down, angled like he didn't want it immediately visible. My pulse didn't spike. It dropped, settled into something steady and focused. I went inside and waited. When Lena came home an hour later, she looked startled to see me. "You're home early," she said. "Work wrapped up," I replied. "How was your day?" She hesitated, then smiled. "Busy." I nodded. "Caldwell's too, apparently." Her face changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. "You saw him?" she asked. "I saw his car," I said evenly. Silence stretched between us. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, recalibrating. "He stopped by to drop something off," she said finally. "Didn't want to bother you." There it was. The same phrasing, reused. Bother. Overwhelm. Protect. That night, after she fell asleep, I opened the laptop again. This time I didn't feel shaky. I felt methodical. I searched. I filtered. I followed threads the way Caldwell himself might have. Carefully, patiently, without assumptions. I found gaps. Deleted messages. Calendar invites that had been removed. A pattern of communication that suggested coordination, not coincidence. And then I found something that made my breath catch. A forwarded email from Caldwell to Lena, never meant to reach the shared inbox. "We need to be smarter about timing. If this turns messy, it could affect everything." Everything. Not us, not the firm. Everything. I sat there in the dark, the glow of the screen reflecting off the window, and understood something crucial. This wasn't just an affair fueled by impulse or loneliness. This was two people who believed they were entitled to manage outcomes, to decide what I deserved to know and when. My wife was sleeping peacefully upstairs, my lawyer was planning contingencies, and I was the only one still pretending this was a misunderstanding. By the time morning came, I wasn't confused anymore, I was resolved. Because once you realize you're being handled, there's only one way to regain control. You stop playing along, and you let the people who think they're smartest in the room reveal exactly how far they're willing to go. The shock didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in, slow and disorienting, like cold water through cracks you didn't know were there. It started with a letter, not an email, not a phone call, a physical envelope addressed to me in a typeface so formal it felt antique. Government seal in the corner, neutral language designed to feel procedural, not personal. I opened it at the kitchen counter, the same place where everything else had started to unravel, and read the first paragraph twice without understanding any of it. Notice of status review. I remember thinking there must be a mistake, a clerical error. Something crossed in a system I didn't even know existed. I'd lived here most of my life, paid taxes, voted, built a career, raised a family. Citizenship wasn't something you questioned any more than gravity. The letter suggested otherwise. It referenced filings I didn't recognize, dates that didn't align with my memory, a status classification I'd never been told applied to me. And at the bottom, a sentence that felt unreal even as I read it. Your legal representative has submitted documentation on your behalf. My legal representative, Caldwell. My hands went numb. I sat down hard in the chair, the letter trembling between my fingers. The room felt too bright, too ordinary, like the world was refusing to acknowledge what had just changed. I read it again, slower, for context, for explanation, for mercy. There was none. I called Caldwell immediately. Straight to voicemail. I called again, then again. No answer. I checked the time, mid-morning, a time he was usually available, or at least responsive. I left a message I didn't recognize as my own voice. Calm on the surface, tight underneath. Call me as soon as you get this. Lena came home an hour later. She saw the letter on the counter before I said a word. Her step faltered. Not much. Just enough. What's that? She asked. I slid it toward her. Watched her read. Watched the color drain from her face in a way that felt different from guilt. This wasn't surprise. It was fear. You knew, I said quietly. She didn't answer. You knew, I repeated, louder now. You let him do this. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. I didn't think it would go this far. That sentence broke something open in me. Go this far, I said. This is my citizenship. She put a hand over her mouth. He said it was procedural, temporary, that it would give us leverage. Us, I echoed. She shook her head quickly. Not like that, I mean, he said it would protect assets, protect me. That if things turned complicated, this would simplify them. Simplify. I felt dizzy. The room tilted slightly, like my body was trying to reject reality. So, you let my lawyer file documents that put my entire life in question. Without telling me. He said you'd panic, she whispered. He said it was better if you didn't know yet. Of course he did. I left the house without another word. Drove aimlessly until my hands stopped shaking enough to hold the wheel. I pulled over in a quiet lot and finally let the shock hit me fully. This wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. Caldwell hadn't just crossed a line. He'd weaponized his expertise, used the law the way a surgeon uses a scalpel. Precise, controlled, devastating. He'd taken advantage of a part of my history I'd trusted him to understand, to protect. And he'd done it with my wife. The call came late that afternoon. I was hoping we could discuss this calmly, Caldwell said, voice smooth as ever, like he was annoyed I'd raised my voice in a library. You filed documents without my consent, I said. You altered my legal status. I acted in your best interest, he replied, given the circumstances. What circumstances? My voice cracked despite my effort. Your affair with my wife? Silence. Brief. Calculated. That's an emotional interpretation, he said. I'd advise you not to conflate personal matters with legal strategy. I laughed then. A sharp, broken sound. You stripped me of my citizenship. No, he corrected gently. I initiated a review, one that was always possible, one you should have been aware of. You're lying. I'm advising, he said. There's a difference. I hung up. I sat in the car as the sun went down, watching shadows stretch across the pavement, and felt something settle into place that felt heavier than anger. This wasn't about winning or losing anymore. This was about survival. I called a number I'd been given months earlier and never used. A referral from a colleague, a specialist I'd waved off because I thought I was already covered. She answered on the second ring. By the time I got home, Lena was waiting in the living room, eyes red, hands clenched. I didn't think he'd hurt you, she said. I looked at her then, really looked, and understood the truth with a clarity that shocked me. He didn't hurt me by accident, I said. He did it because you gave him permission. She cried then, full sobs, apologies, explanations that arrived too late to matter. I went upstairs and closed the door. That night, lying awake in a house that no longer felt like mine, I stared at the ceiling and tried to understand how quickly a life could be destabilized when trust collapses at the wrong intersection of intimacy and power. My lawyer had helped strip me of my citizenship. My wife had helped him do it. And I was left holding a letter that proved something I never wanted to learn, that the law doesn't protect you from betrayal, it just records it. Winning didn't feel the way I expected it to. I'd imagined relief, some dramatic release, where the tension finally drained from my body and I could breathe like a normal person again. Instead, when the decision came down, all I felt was a strange, quiet steadiness. Like a structure that had been rattling for months had finally settled into place. The review was overturned. My citizenship was reinstated in full. The filings Caldwell had submitted were deemed improper, procedurally flawed, and, most importantly, unauthorized. The words were clean and formal, delivered without emotion, but they landed with the force of a door slamming shut on the worst version of my future. I remember sitting in the hallway afterward, holding the official notice in my hands, staring at my name like I was seeing it for the first time. Not because I'd gotten something back, but because I'd come dangerously close to losing it without ever consenting to the risk. Lena wasn't there. She hadn't been there for most of it, actually. Somewhere between the initial shock and the slow grind of hearings and affidavits, she'd receded into the background of my life, present in the house, absent in everything else. We spoke in logistics, schedules, neutral tones that kept us from touching anything raw. Caldwell, on the other hand, was very present, too present. He sent messages through intermediaries, filed responses that tried to reframe his actions as aggressive advocacy, suggested misunderstandings, claimed he'd acted with implied authority. Every word was polished, defensive, precise. The language of someone who still believed the system would protect him if he spoke its dialect fluently enough. That's when my new attorney said something that changed the temperature of the room. "Do you know," she asked calmly, "that he hasn't been licensed for over a year?" I blinked. "What?" She slid a document across the table. "His license lapsed. Administrative suspension. He never reinstated it." The words took a second to register. My lawyer, the man who'd filed documents that nearly stripped me of my citizenship, the man sleeping with my wife, the man who'd spoken with such confidence about legal strategy, had been practicing without a valid license, illegally. The irony was almost elegant. Everything he'd done to me, every filing, every letter, every strategic move, was suddenly reframed, not as misguided zeal, not as overreach, but as fraud. I felt something shift inside my chest then. Not rage, not vindication, but clarity. This wasn't about retaliation anymore. This was about accountability, about refusing to let someone with power rewrite the damage they'd caused by hiding behind confidence and silence. We filed the counterclaim. It was clean, documented, ruthless in its simplicity, unauthorized practice, breach of fiduciary duty, abuse of position, each point supported by dates, records, signatures, his own trail, now turned against him. When Caldwell received notice, he called me directly for the first time since everything began. "You're making a mistake," he said, voice strained but still trying to sound authoritative. "This will get messy." "It already is," I replied. "You just don't control it anymore." "You don't understand the consequences," he said. "For you. For your wife." I paused. "You lost the right to advise me when you lost your license." Silence. Then quietly, "Lena didn't want this." I closed my eyes. Neither did I. The fallout was swift. Investigations opened. Not dramatic, not public, just efficient. Files reviewed. Clients contacted. The calm machinery of oversight, doing what it was always meant to do, when someone assumed they were untouchable. Lena tried to talk to me that night. She cried. She apologized again, this time without strategy. She said she'd believed Caldwell when he told her he knew what he was doing, that he'd reassured her everything was legal, safe, controlled. "I thought he was protecting us," she said. I looked at her and finally said the truth out loud. He was protecting himself, and you let him. That was the moment something ended. Not explosively, not loudly, but completely. Whatever version of us had existed before power and secrecy entered the room didn't survive the exposure. The counterclaim moved forward. Caldwell stopped calling. I moved my things into the guest room, then into a small apartment closer to work. The house felt different when I returned for paperwork or logistics, like a place I used to live in, not a home I was meant to rebuild. When the final notice arrived confirming my restored status, I folded it carefully and put it away. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. I'd trusted a system without verifying the people inside it. I'd trusted intimacy where transparency should have been non-negotiable, and I'd learned, too late but not irreversibly, that authority without accountability is just another form of manipulation. The law gave me my citizenship back, but it was the counterclaim that gave me something else entirely, my agency. Because for the first time since the first sign, since my lawyer started acting familiar, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing. What remained after everything fell? I used to think endings announced themselves, papers signed, doors slammed, someone leaving with a box of things under their arm. That isn't how it happened. It ended the way rot does, quietly, thoroughly, until nothing familiar could hold its shape. The counterclaim did what I didn't expect it to do. It didn't explode. It didn't create spectacle. It worked. Files were reviewed. Records were compared. People asked careful questions with careful pens. The phrase unauthorized practice moved from footnote to headline inside the profession that once protected him. Caldwell stopped being introduced as counsel and started being referred to as the subject. His voice, once calm and instructive, lost its authority the moment it couldn't lean on a license. When the final notice arrived, it was brief. Administrative language, no adjectives, his right to practice revoked, past actions flagged, ongoing matters reassigned, clients notified. The man who'd spoken about strategy and leverage and what would complicate things was suddenly very simple, unemployed, uninsurable, unwelcome. He tried to reach me once more, weeks later, through a mutual acquaintance. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to argue about. The system he believed he could bend had done what systems do when you stop flattering them. They closed. Lena thought the fallout would stop there. It didn't. The house went first. Not because I took it from her, but because it stopped being shelter once the truth settled into the walls. Friends withdrew in polite increments. Invitations slowed, then disappeared. People didn't confront her. They didn't need to. Reputation doesn't require a verdict to move. It just needs context. She tried to rebuild, at first with explanations. Stress, a mistake, a misunderstanding that got out of hand. But explanations need an audience willing to accept them, and hers was gone. Even sympathy has limits when betrayal crosses into collaboration. The unexpected part wasn't that she lost him, it was that she lost everyone else. I watched it happen from a distance I chose carefully, not out of spite, out of self-preservation. I moved my remaining things from the house on a weekday morning when no one was around. The rooms echoed, not with anger, with vacancy. She stood in the doorway, hands clasped like she was waiting for instructions. "I never meant for it to end like this," she said. "I know," I replied, and I did. Intent had stopped mattering a long time ago. "What happens now?" she asked. I paused. Not because I didn't know, but because saying it out loud would make it final. "You figure out who you are without someone managing the outcome," I said. "And I figure out who I am without someone rewriting it." She nodded, tears gathering, but didn't reach for me. That surprised me. Maybe she finally understood that touch couldn't negotiate this away. The last thing she asked me was the most revealing. "Do you hate me?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "I just don't recognize us anymore." The divorce was efficient. No dramatics. Assets divided, names separated. a life untangled with more precision than it had been built. When it was over, I felt lighter. Not relieved exactly. Unburdened. Caldwell disappeared from the orbit of my days entirely. I heard fragments through the quiet channels that carry bad news, consulting gigs that fell through, a move to a smaller city, explanations that no longer convinced anyone important. Authority is a currency that doesn't survive exposure. And then there was me. I expected anger to linger. It didn't. What stayed was something calmer and more instructive, a clear-eyed understanding of how trust actually works. Not as a feeling, as a practice, one that requires transparency, not reassurance. Months later, I stood in line at a coffee shop and realized something strange. My shoulders weren't tight. My breathing wasn't shallow. The background noise in my head, the constant calculating, the quiet dread, was gone. I had my citizenship, my name, my life. But more importantly, I had boundaries that didn't require explanation. The ending everyone expected was revenge, public ruin, a dramatic turn that made the story neat. That didn't happen. The unexpected ending was this: they lost everything they tried to control. I gained everything I'd stopped protecting. Sometimes the worst thing that can happen to people who manipulate outcomes is being forced to live inside the ones they created without a license, without a narrative, without someone else to sign off on their choices. I didn't need to punish them. The truth did that on its own. And when I finally closed the door on that chapter, it didn't echo. It clicked. Quiet, precise, and final.